Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making Strides podcast here with my co host, Adam Short. Today, we have a pretty cool episode where we are going to be talking about some of the psychology around what runners are thinking and in terms of injury prevention and performance and things like that. It's some really interesting concepts. We were inspired by to have this episode from a Instagram post from Blake Dot Sports Podiatrist and Stress Fracture Physio. They posted, and we're just talking about all of these really awesome topics today with some really just eye-opening answers from runners regarding what they think is causing, their injuries versus just what's important with running and their relationship with running and stuff like that. So we're going to just have basically a quick episode to really just kind of talk about what this study discovered with runners, because it's really quite spectacular. The amount of misinformation that's going around that's potentially harmful to runners, and just the way that runners are thinking about running and going about their running in a way that this is why Adam and I do this and do what we do and love doing what we do, is because there are just so many small things and ways where we can improve the quality of life of a runner and what they're doing, and small places to kind of like change mindset and push the needle with performance and all this sort of stuff. So we're going to be, it was kind of a confusing intro, but you'll get it here soon. There's a couple of different slides on this post. We're going to go slide by slide and really just talk about each one. And what am I missing here, Adam? It's based off a study. A lot of this information is from, I think there's two studies. And yeah, Adam, do you want to take over? Just talk about the studies real quick. Who did them?
Yeah, I can talk about the first one. I'd actually look at the second one, but the second one is just one of the several slides and something we can hit on in maybe a more global piece than the specifics of it. But this main one, they gave a questionnaire to over 700 runners prior to a race. The sounds like it's very kind of business oriented. It's not like a world major marathon, nothing crazy like that. Um, and they gave them just a questionnaire, which one thing to, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but one thing I wanted to point out here is that some of these questions were multiple choice. It wasn't just a question and they kind of fill in kind of what they thought or what they think about something. So on some of these, it does kind of skew things a little bit in terms of there's kind of a predetermined destination. Now there's multiple destinations there, but while they had the option to add in free text or write in whatever they wanted or thought, not everyone's going to take that extra step. Even to get, a good return on questionnaires is sometimes difficult. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as we kind of go through this.
Cool. We start with the first slide. Before we give you the results, I think you and I should just answer the question. So let's rank. We'll do like ranked choice, I guess, because it's really all of these reasons are why we run, probably. So if I were to ask you, what are the main reasons why you run, or rank these in kind of ranked choice format, meaning starting with the most relevant to least relevant reasons why you run? Okay, so social interaction, atmosphere, health, or just for like challenging yourself, like personal record.
I would interestingly go the complete opposite direction that the people did in this study, which again is probably another important thing to note here, and that I'll mention in a second. So I would go personal record first. I just love the challenge of exploring kind of what I can do. Um, and then health follows that. There, while I very much preach and talk about how those are synonymous, it's in some cases, for some periods, there's definitely a push towards like, we're going to squeeze as much out of this as possible. And it may not always be the healthiest thing. And then we go to atmosphere and then social interaction. For me, the social piece is like, whatever. If a group run gets bigger than 5 people, I'm usually bailing. I like kind of the solitude. I like the smaller. That's just first, like me as a person as well. Like parties, not my thing. Small little gatherings with some close friends, that's kind of more my thing. So why don't you give you yours, and then I'll contrast how kind of us as runners compare to
Yeah.
the individuals they surveyed.
Can you describe for me, help me understand what atmosphere means a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I interpret it in as like a group run. You go to a brewery or whatever. There's a certain kind of just atmosphere and culture around that. and the runners that attract that versus like your world marathon major or like a Western States 100 or, Black Canyon, something like that.
Is it like the culture of it, or is it like the atmosphere, like being out in nature? Like,
Well, I think it's both. So I think it's kind of that it blends with the social piece a little bit, and that there's just a certain energy, not injury, around that, as
yet.
well as, yeah, getting getting outside, getting in nature, getting in the trees, getting in the woods, getting in the urban parks if you're in a more city environment. So that in contrast to like just going to the gym and running on the treadmill.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to just say, yeah, what you said, but I mean, personal record and health are pretty up there. But yeah, if I were to reflect on this, I think challenging myself is, yeah, I'm just so competitive, especially with myself. I mean, with others, and really just seeing what I'm capable of. So that would probably be under that personal record. One, health has always been really high up there for me, especially with my dad, the cardiac disease kind of history, family history I have. Just staying active has always been extremely important to me. I do like the social interaction portion, but actions speak louder than words, right? And I mean, I just don't run with people all that often. I don't. And the fact that I run as much as I do, but not with people, just goes to show you that maybe that one's last. But the atmosphere of it, I don't know, like kind of posted that sappy Instagram reel the other like week. I mean, that just goes to show you that that probably is something that resonates with me, the atmosphere of things more than the social interaction. Although I do like running with people, and I do like, yeah, group runs and stuff every now and then, but it's not what's driving me to run. That's not the reason I run. Let's go back to the core question. What are the reasons you run? The social reason is not the reason I run. So that's probably last. Cool.
So of these 720 recreational runners they surveyed, by and large, the majority of them, and I'm quoting this from the paper here, displayed low to moderate physical activity levels and were rather unambitious regarding targeted finish time. So that is a very different population of the running world than where AJ and I sit. So again, just another component that, we keep in the back of our head as we kind of are going through this to understand why somebody might answer the way they do with some of these questions.
Very interesting. Okay. You ready to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what was the essential question here for this next slide? They were asked what question exactly? I'm trying to find it.
Yep. It is, what strategies do you consider effective in preventing running injuries?
Yeah. So they were given the option of like having the right shoe, stretching, balance training, insoles, resistance training, and then just appropriate training. So, Adam, you give me like your take on what are the most important aspects to injury prevention. And yeah, we can get all into semantics of like, you and I both know there's no such thing as injury prevention, but out of these injury reduction strategies, which of these would you consider to be the strongest, or do you find yourself frequently prescribing and talking to patients about?
Yeah, the exact opposite of what is skewed and in the results here. So by far and large, it is training load and appropriate progressions, particularly with my coaching clients. Like, we don't want to skip steps. Things can be kind of boring, almost repetitive. And we just want gentle nudges in the physiology. We don't want to make any big, huge gains because that's probably going to end up a few weeks down the road to bite us in the butt if we're not really careful on the tail end of something like that. So appropriate training or training load, training factors, however you want to describe it, would be my number one. Below that would be the resistance or strength training. then probably the balance. I'd be interested to, like, if we could do another survey of those that, of really just of these participants, what is balance training to them? Because balance
Yeah.
training can mean and look like really different. Whether you talk to you talk to me, you talk to another clinician, talk to somebody like who's maybe like in the neuro world,
Yeah.
like what they're doing is way different.
I mean,
So
I'm thinking like standing on a piece of foam, like single leg, trying to catch a ball or perturbations. I mean, maybe doing a single leg deadlift, maybe. I think there's something like that. I don't know. Maybe Bosu ball type
yeah,
stuff. That's what I think of. Or at least that's what I think the average runner thinks when they think balance training.
that's what I was gonna. I think that's probably what most people were thinking about with this. But yeah, those would be by and large my top three. And then you have the shoes and insoles, taping, massage, stretching, whatever else. Those are kind of just some added things that can sometimes be nice acutely in the moment, help things feel better, but it's not going to prevent anything, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, in summary, this study is essentially saying that people think the wrong things are working for them for injury prevention. So, let me just say that again. So, this study is saying that people have very inaccurate beliefs on what is actually working for injury prevention. They think that having the right shoe and stretching are the most important things that they can be doing to prevent injury, where almost none of them, and actually zero of them, ranked having appropriate training as being a tool for injury prevention when we know by far is vastly the most important thing that they could be doing. And none of them know this. So that makes me question, like, what type of people are we interviewing? Because I'd like to think that the runners that I surround myself with know that much. And I do. I have workshops. I run workshops and I like to have very interactive questions at my workshops. Be like, hey, I literally go ask Joey right now. Like every single workshop that I do for runners, I start with, what are the things we know that like are causing injuries? Like why are runners getting injured at such a high rate? What is happening? And we get all these answers. And yes, like having like we always get the people who are like having the wrong shoes, like not stretching, not lifting. And then but there are a couple people that are always like too much too soon or whatever. I'm like, yes. I go and I give them a high five. Right? So like how many people?
Yeah.
How many?
But
720 people?
this is important consideration when we talk like methodology. So number one, talked about just the population, that who they were being surveyed, the low to moderate activity level. So
What is their IQ? I'm just kidding.
I'm going to interpret that they have not been running for very long. They do not run very much, in which case, they are probably set up to only know whatever media has come across them, right? And whatever the biggest, loudest media sources are, which are proponents of or promote a lot more of this kind of passive stuff. We also need to note that the survey itself, this was a multiple choice question. So it kind of skews towards these answers. And one of the answers, or one of the options, is not training load or anything to do with training. That is something that this individual on Instagram added in because it wasn't, I guess it never came up listed. So that was something somebody would have to take an extra step to write in, which is, had that been
That's an issue.
So yeah, so I actually kind of put that less on the survey participants and more on the authors of why is this not an option?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That does change the perspective a bit. So, but it is still surprising the amount of runners that think that just having the right shoe or stretching
Definitely. Yeah.
is going to be adequate injury prevention. And I hear it. I hear it. I mean, the stretching thing is ridiculous. But then the shoe thing, I mean, every single time I am in like the shoe store, like Altitude Running or Runner's Roost, I am there and I'm chatting with people, doing what I'm doing, whether it's a workshop or hanging up stuff or whatever I'm at the store for, and like hanging up flyers or whatever. And I just hear people, they walk in, they're like, hi, I have plantar fasciitis. I was told to like, I need shoes like to fix that. I'm just like, God, what the? And
Yeah.
I want to walk over to them and start talking to them, but I'm like, no, stop, don't do it.
Yeah.
Um,
I would echo that. I always ask people like, what sense do you make of your situation? Like, why are we here? And it's shoes. It's no, I'm not stretching. I didn't do enough massage. I didn't like whatever. Once in a while, you get like, hey, my sleep really hasn't been good. Maybe wasn't training as well as I could have, or something like that. But by and large, it's things or like my glutes aren't firing, or like some sort of muscle mass, something like kind of really out there kind of thinking in terms of where the current landscape of our real true understanding of injuries are.
yeah, and what's a little bit frustrating, but also makes a lot of sense is the fact that a lot of these misbeliefs on what are the solves or solutions for fixing injuries or injury prevention, it correlates directly to what people are fed from our capitalistic kind of society, right? Where if you go on their Facebook and their feed and the ads they're getting and the content that they're being fed is all of this stuff that's talking about, their shoes being crap and this new shoe solving their problems and this like sauna fixing things and stretching and
Plunge.
products, right? Insoles. What was that? A plunge, the cold
Oh,
plunge. Yeah,
plunge.
all these things. It's just like I guess people are just a little brainwashed, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 in 5 people report pain at rest. Okay. So, this one's a little bit interesting. Adam, why don't you take this one? Just give me your first thoughts and then I can kind of chime in there.
So basically, people are going into the race with some sort of ache, pain, niggle. Maybe it's an actual injury, whatever label. And that's even occurring at rest, not just during running. And then the pain during running is actually more than what they're experiencing at rest, which, makes a lot of sense. Yet these individuals still plan to race. And maybe that's an okay thing to do. Maybe it's not. This is I can't remember the kilometers it is, but it ends up being 5.6 miles is the distance of this race. So it's not like super far, but still like, if you're not a fast runner, you're gonna be out there for a bit. Like it's probably not a good idea to run when you're experiencing a considerable amount of pain.
Yeah. So, another clarification I think we have to make is like, I mean, I'm sorry, but pain, pain and niggles and stuff like that is just kind of sometimes part of training, part of being a runner. But is this pain that's kind of like from an injury or from niggles that really shouldn't be there, right? Like, what kind of pain is this? Because, I mean, look at me. I have a chondral lesion in my patellofemoral joint. I mean, I have pain at, not at rest, but, I could have pain fairly often, right? But doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing anything wrong. And there have certainly been times where I mean, I had that weird like subtalar joint pain kind of in the back of my heel, my left foot for, I mean, I felt that most runs for like 5 years, So I totally get that. So I guess I need some more context as to kind of like what kind of pain are people having?
Yeah. And so the best we have is a descriptor of intensity at rest and during movement, and then a location, which is very general. So we don't have a lot of context to go off this of if this is truly appropriate or if this is something we really need to pull back from, unfortunately. So questions from the survey is, do you have pain right now? Yes or no? If yes, how strong is it? 0 to 10 at rest. And then how strong is it? 0 to 10 during movement. And then where do you have pain? Foot, knee, hip, back, or other location when you'd write it in. The most common report was from the knee and the back. So
Yeah,
knee,
that's
not
interesting.
surprising, but the back when we think of running related injuries is a little bit more surprising because we don't generally see that so much.
But the
I,
population,
maybe that's where I was going. Yeah, maybe it speaks more to the population we have here who are not as active individuals, not quite as fit. Maybe they have other medical issues that contribute to that maybe result in like some poor metabolic health or something like that. So yeah, all pieces we don't quite know.
Okay. And then, okay, so moving on to the next slide. Okay, so let's go back to, I think I like hearing what what exactly was presented to them on the survey. I'm trying to find it as well. Do you have it in front of you for this next one? Why don't you go for it?
Sure. It's to you. Let's try. I do not.
On the study.
This, yeah, the list of questions I'm looking at does not look like there's one directly related to this next one
So,
here.
so I think it has to do with the behavior when injured, right? So when injured, runners rarely replace running with other activity. They usually just become more sedentary. Okay, yeah. So with this one, I think the biggest conversation point here is the fact that I think this speaks really well to the typical identity of a runner, where runners are just running. Running is what they do. They don't do much other than run. When they're not running, they're miserable, depressed, and not fun to be around. And when they're injured. So this tends to kind of line up with what I see a lot of. I get injured runners in front of me, and they're just like, they either force themselves to continue running, sometimes getting themselves into a tricky situation, or they just don't do anything and they just rest, right? And so I do think that it speaks to kind of like their mental health and their longevity with their relationship with running, like having a healthy relationship with running. I truly believe that, and this is just my like soapbox and take on this, is that the fact that this tells us that when runners get injured, they just don't do anything. They don't even replace that time in their week with something else that's a healthy behavior or habit or hobby. It just speaks to the fact that most people have an unhealthy relationship with running. And this is where I do pride myself in having a very eclectic recreational hobbies kind of repertoire. I'm strength training. I am doing some sparring and combat classes every now and then. I want to do more of. I would love to do some wrestling or BJJ. Like I have too many hobbies, especially get music involved between piano and guitar.
What is the little drum thing you've been playing with?
My handpan that I'm learning. Yeah, I literally go ask my wife. I have way too many hobbies. I want to hang out with my kids. Anyways, there's so many other things, but I think this survey is speaking more to like exercise. So this is a good example. I mean, I was recovering and still kind of am from a bone stress injury, and I was unable to bike actually because that is the number one go-to activity you see runners actually replacing their running time with when they're injured is they just hop on the bike, and there are inherent problems there. But I couldn't even do that. So I was actually lifting a lot. I just started lifting more. I did try the combat and sparring then. Unfortunately, my hip did not like that at the time. And that was my first inclination, was to just go and try and find other active hobbies to stay healthy and strong. And it's sad to see that runners are just in large not doing the same. So, Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the population they surveyed. I think the more recreational you get, the more it is, okay, running is out. I'm just not going to do anything. The more competitive you get, the more running just gets replaced by insane amounts of biking, pool work, elliptical, whatever it may be. Because I certainly had some people where I put some tight guardrails on what they can and can't do and what is okay. Because otherwise they will just go hammer the bike for an hour or more every single day until they can run again. And probably oftentimes, that is not a very great strategy to really facilitate moving forward in that situation.
Yeah.
Especially if we're talking like energy availability issues, where they're just not consuming enough calories to support the training they're trying to do. So I think it just comes back to what population we're talking about.
So, Adam, when you were in the thick of it with your ankle, right? What were you doing? What were you replacing your training time with?
So initially, I was that person going crazy on the bike because I thought it was just going to be the fracture. And in like 6 weeks, I was going to ease back into running, and like maybe I could spare a track season right? So I was trying to like really maintain as much fitness as possible. But as I got into things and like things just weren't feeling right, and I started understanding that there was more involved with like the peroneal tendon and stuff, um, the biking went away because I really just these days I just don't enjoy the bike like I used to, and I just started hiking a lot, and that was my primary thing because I just needed to get outside. I couldn't ride on the trainer anymore. The Colorado Springs is not the most bike friendly place, at least like in town, unless you want to go drive somewhere. So really hiking was probably my primary means.
Cool. Okay. So with this last slide, let's see here. So it's basically stratifying people into 3 categories based on risk,
Yeah. And it's kind of the next
injury
thing
risk.
we were just hitting on there, where it's kind of your relationship with exercise. How flexible are you with things? The more flexible you can be, the more you're willing to move days around because of schedule, because of poor sleep, because of whatever, the less likely you are to develop a running related injury. And the more strict and rigid you are with your training, regardless of what else is going on in your life, the more likelihood there is to develop a running related injury.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in the caption, he says, runners with a more obsessive mindset, so like fewer emotional resources, they just report higher injury rates, right? So break that down a little bit based on what you see here and also your experience.
Yeah. So I think it also comes back to the recreational versus competitive, because the more competitive you get, the more I feel like obsessive is a little bit of a strong term, but maybe it's appropriate here. To where it's and maybe I put that caveat on it because I feel myself trend towards that often. But the more competitive you get, the more rigid people often get, because they got to hit their sessions, and that's it's a smaller margin of gain, right? And it takes more and more to get just smaller and smaller improvements, versus a recreational athlete could take 3 weeks off, no big deal, get back into it in 3 weeks, they're like right back where they were. It's not as big of a loss for them.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not fair to say, because that implies it's not as important to them. It could still be really important. I don't want to undermine anybody's
Yeah.
personal situation or thoughts
Yeah.
around it, but I feel like I'm kind of rambling now. But if you want
Well,
to me for
yeah,
a
because
second.
I think there's 2 key things that we have to talk about here. 2 concepts we have to talk about here. So there's the concept of what I call the injury performance paradox, and that's something I just kind of phrase I kind of coined to describe the fact that when anybody doing anything, especially in athletics, they're at a higher level, they're training harder for bigger goals, they're always going to be a higher risk for injury. And this has been studied across the board. I was literally just prepping a workshop content for, or reviewing some old workshop content I've done for rock climbers. Same thing. If you look at the grade that they report that they climb, it's the higher risk of injury. If you look at runners, the faster finishing times, the higher training volume, the higher the injury rates. And so this is what I call the injury performance paradox. It's just something that's always going to be there. And it just goes straight off of what you just said, that these are individuals who are just really trying everything that they can to toe this line of like too much versus getting training adaptations and all that stuff. So they're always going to be a high risk for injury. But then we look at this chart here, and it's saying essentially that you have people on one side of the spectrum of risk, low risk, are going to be the people who are less obsessive, so to speak, who are more flexible. They can adjust their plans. They have social support. They're not compelled to train. They've good coping resources, stronger physical, cognitive, and emotional recovery. But then you have these other people on the other side of the spectrum who are high risk for injury, and they're compelled to train, poor physical, cognitive, and emotional recovery tools and habits, fewer coping skills, and then less flexible with their sport. So I do think that you can be, and the ideal that we want for ourselves and the people that we work with is for somebody to have those low risk qualities, but then you can also be in a position where you're pushing the injury performance paradox, right? You can still be having big goals, pushing your training really hard, but also just have a sensible approach to where you're like making adjustments where you need to make adjustments. You're not running just to run or getting a workout in despite flags and things like that. You know what I mean? Like you can still train hard and have these other kind of like qualities that reduce your risk of injury, right? Like that does exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly can.
I don't know. That was my take on it too. So I don't think everybody's in one of these three boxes: low risk, medium risk, and high risk based on their kind of like mindset and emotional resources and coping strategies and stuff like that. I do think that it's just, if we were to, and as studies like to do, if we were to control for other variables, these are things that do predispose somebody to having higher or lower risk for injury. So, but the take home is it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the category you're in. There are other factors we have to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. We all know that person that's like super type A and like really high strung, trains like a maniac, and never gets injured. And then there's,
I mean, here's a better example. I mean, we all have that person who literally is on like a 5, 6, 8, 10-year run streak for God knows what reason.
oh yeah,
We all have that. Not maybe we don't all have this person, but I had this person who I know who was doing 100-mile-a-week streaks. Yeah. Why? That is the red category. Oops, hold on, my headphones disconnected again. But yeah, that's a red flag for sure. So that's really what I think of when I think of somebody who's like got these compelled to train, has obsessive mindset around running. So
yeah, and I think it's worth being clear, at least for me, and maybe you agree with this, like there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's probably worth considering that, like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing it to this level?
Yeah,
because that might be more revealing and more beneficial than hitting these streaks.
Yeah, and you never know where somebody's coming from. I have literally seen situations where somebody's doing a run streak, but then they're like, that's part of their recovery from alcoholism. Right? Like, I get that. Still not the healthiest thing, but that's a huge win for them, right? And if that's how they're coping right now, it doesn't mean they're going to be like that forever. So, anyway, just having generous assumptions of people is a good thing in general. I think that's pretty much it. So I think if I were to sum this up, if you have a summary, you can sum up too. But essentially, we had that first slide, which was, just to recap everything. The first slide was, why are people running? And the survey found that most people run for the social interaction in the atmosphere. Not as many people running for health and personal record or challenging themselves, but that could be the population we chose, or the study chose. Then we have the next slide was, people have vastly inaccurate beliefs about what actually prevents injuries in running. They think that the right shoe and just stretching is going to be the biggest thing that's going to prevent them from getting injured over the other options, which are balance training, insoles, and resistance training. But, and I would even say, and I'll just remind everybody that like, maybe people are listening and being like, oh, resistance training should have more. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But we still don't have studies that really have told us for sure that strength training reduces injuries in distance runners. So we're still waiting for that. We can assume that when we strength train, that things are getting stronger and more resilient. 1 + 1 = 2, but we just don't have the data yet. So we just kind of have that asterisk when we talk about that. And you should check out our 3 episodes on strength training for runners that we did way back when. And then we also mentioned that they just did not put the true reason, or the true one biggest thing that does prevent injuries, which is appropriate training. And that wasn't even an option for these people to choose. So the next slide was 1 in 5 people report pain at rest. And then it was, what about 1 in 5 people show up to events already in pain? And that is just very eye-opening. You'd think Adam and I would have people knocking down our door to work with us. So it's like, why are people in pain but not getting help? Or like, why are they staying in pain? There's a lot of questions there. And then the next slide was, injured runners don't necessarily always replace, like, let's say they're, doing 20 minutes a day of running on average. If they stop running because of injury, they're not necessarily replacing that time with healthy behaviors or exercise. So that is alarming. Once again, maybe speaking to the population. And then that last slide was just that the folks who have healthier psychology and relationship with running and behavior surrounding running typically have lower injury risk. And those who are more obsessive and have less flexible relationships with running tend to be more injured. So that was the recap. And Adam, do you have any final remarks?
Just a shameless plug for us. If you're struggling with this, any one of these factors, reach out, whether it's on the performance side of things, rehab side of things. We'd love to help you.
Yep, absolutely. For sure. Yep, Up and Running PT up in Fort Collins. We got Adam Run Mental down in Colorado Springs. So yeah, hit us up. Anyways, guys, this was really interesting to us. Hopefully it was somewhat interesting for you guys, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Go out and make some strides. Okay, later.